it's that time. People are being pretty shy today. We got like 100 people in here, and we're not getting too many questions.
Kind of quiet.
Ask a question.
Dog doesn't bite.
I'm Brent Ozar for an hour. Gotta give me some.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's jump in there. David Muse asks, so you want your application to execute SP send DBmail directly through its schema, or should schema owned by DBAs only be allowed? We created SP procs, and the programmer schema executes the one DBO sproc, which then executes the send underscore DBmail. What's the security risks involved? Does it matter who accesses send underscore DBmail?
That's a lot of question.
Yeah.
What do you, for security risks? I mean, I guess someone could, if you allowed them to generate their own query, they could potentially email themselves, sensitive data. So that's something to be careful of. I tend to have send DBmail, when I set it up for things, there was very specific things like alerts or reports that got sent to very specific people. It wasn't something that I was letting people access ad hoc to, shoot out emails about. SQL Server is not Exchange Server. You should.
All right. Richard asks, are there any significant risk in granting developers in the development environment?
Yes.
DB level and granting them anything in the development environment.
In a development environment, no. I mean, you got to be careful if you have, production data in there, and again, it's personally identifiable. You might want to scrub that before you hand it over to them. But as far as granting developers rights in development environments, it's kind of what you need to do so that they can develop things.
It's like testing and development. That makes sense. We have a lot of our clients that actually, well, not a lot, but people that reach out to me saying, we don't have a development environment. If you can just come and parachute into production, that would be great.
Jessica, if they write a big enough check, I will do it. You know how I feel about that. I'm okay with it. Guns ablaze.
I think you're the only one.
I think Tara would do it too.
Yeah, probably.
Just want to hand over the keys.
No, it's funny that it's actually something that consulting has made me miss is putting out fires live on a production server. It's fun, it's exciting. You get in there, get this one index out and everything's fixed.
The thrill of uncertainty.
That's fun. You get into it.
Maybe we should just give him a call at 2 a.m., Doug, and just see how he reacts.
Yeah, we'll just we'll slip a pager in his suitcase during the company retreat. What's this for?
Yeah, Ashley would love that. All right, let's move on to a question from Joshua. He says, syncing non-AG objects, logins, jobs, etc., across instances. Previously, there was an SSMS plugin, but it appears it hasn't been updated since SSMS 2012. Do you guys know of any other utility good for this?
Oh boy. I'm trying to think if SQL Compare would do that.
No, SQL Compare only does schema and indexes as far as I know. But you know what? Actually, maybe if you pointed it at MSDB, it might. Or SQL Data Compare, I think, is another one that Redgate has that might do something similar. But as far as out-of-the-box utilities that do that stuff, no. It's been a long time since I had to sync anything.
Was it the SSMS tools pack that?
Laden makes.
Yeah.
He updates that. He's on top
right.
of it.
I'm trying to think of what plugin he's talking about here.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right. Well, maybe you'll get back to us. Justin wants to know, is there an easy way to put statistics out of date quickly?
Yeah, update data.
That easy?
Pretty much.
Modify your table. Statistics will go out of whack.
That is especially easy to do, say January 2nd.
Yeah.
You want to blow up a query.
All right. Question from Chris Spolkholder. Do you see column store indexes making their way into OLTP workloads in the future versions of SQL Server?
No, that's not what they're made for.
Yeah.
They are made for data warehouses. They work well generally, but they work really well with partitioning. And neither partitioning nor column store indexes are geared towards OLTP type people. OLTP people want nice little narrow indexes that their little queries can fly around real quick. But OLTP is made for reporting and big data warehouse workloads and ugly hash joins from that billion row fact table to all your little snowflake dimension tables. So, probably not. Tell your developers to stop using select star. You don't need column store. You need better developers.
All right. Question from Tamara Sebastian. Using database application roles. Good, bad, when to use, what to watch for when you're using them.
Anyone? What is that question? Hold on. I'm afraid to click away from this and look at the questions because I don't want to mess up the slideshow. It may or may not be working.
It says when using database.
What was that?
Database application roles.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Do you mean role role in SQL Server or something? Like users logins, roles and stuff? You have to clarify that a little bit for me. Because if it's an application outside of SQL Server that has roles, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is really typical, right? I mean, that's typically what we have is from an application. An application has roles, and then that's kind of how we roll. So are we talking about using SQL Server roles versus application roles?
Yeah, not quite. Oh, she says later versus a user-defined role. So built-in roles versus user-defined, I guess.
Well,
yeah, I mean, the ones built into SQL Server have they span a pretty good amount of different levels of access and ability within the server. If one doesn't exist that meets your needs, then you might need a custom one.
Yeah, like one that I always ended up creating was Executor. Because that one doesn't exist by default, but pretty much everyone is like, well, yeah, if someone needs to run stored procs, just create an executor role, and that works pretty well. I know Reporting Services does that too. It has an rsexec role that it creates when it installs. So yeah, I mean, you can lock them down however you like. It is pretty handy.
Yeah, I think another one that I typically would create, or have the DBAs would create, would be one that has read-only on the data, but has grants access to query plans and statistics and things like that. So then if the developers can go in and at least take a look at some of those stuff, maybe not so much in production, but definitely in testing stage.
Yeah, I mean, you could also use something similar to that to sort of lock down who can run some XP command shell if you have to write files, but you don't want everyone writing files and other stuff.
Yeah.
Erik asks, in what situation is a deadlock acceptable?
I don't know. I guess when you hate life enough to accept them. With deadlocks, what happens is the server will choose whatever was the less expensive one to kill off and roll back. It's never really good to have a deadlock. It's usually something you can work your way out of. If you're experiencing tons of locking problems, you could do something like recommitted snapshot isolation that will allow you to just kind of bypass the data that's being locked and read basically a second version of it that was the last known value of that data. But generally deadlocks stink, and you don't want them.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's not really, that deadlock shouldn't happen. It's all about how you handle them. So it's all about having retry logic in your application to, catch the deadlock and, retry whatever that query was trying to do. After the deadlock is caught, you retry it. So make sure that, if you are experiencing deadlocks and, you can't maybe change isolation levels to recommitted or snapshot, or, you can't, it's a vendor app and you can't go mucking with indexes to improve things. You have to wait for a release to come up. If there's a way for you to just keep retrying things, then That's the only way to really work around deadlocks.
Is that pretty common that you see in critical cares?
From time to
Yeah,
time.
fairly common.
Yeah.
Different reasons.
Yeah. The worst is when people that are experiencing the deadlocks also count on that same system for real-time data, like they need up to the second fresh data. That can become a big problem.
Yeah. I was gonna say something that flew out of my head. Figured. Oh no, I ran into one really interesting one where where parallelism was actually causing deadlocks, and it was like these guys had these massive server. It was like 4x12 procs, and they had max stop set to I think 12, but cost threshold was still 5. So like every query in the world would go parallel, and there would be all these crazy parallel weights, and the deadlock graph looks like a weird Christmas ornament. This like spider web across and this ornate Swarovski, whatever that is.
Do you guys have any good or know of any good resources for how to fix deadlocks? Have you got any blog posts?
We have at least 3 on our site if you just search for deadlocks. I think Jeremiah wrote one, Ken wrote one, and I think maybe Jess wrote one way back. But we do have at least 3 blog posts on that. I know because I was getting started on writing a 4th one not too long ago. So I did look at what we already had.
Let's see. Jason asks, how do I best upgrade from SQL Server 2016 CTP 3.2 to 3.3?
Uninstall and reinstall.
Pretty much.
With the CTP, I mean, do you have a production workload on it? If not, then just you can even just get a brand new VM.
Probably shouldn't be running production data on CTP anyway. Just a thought.
No, not unless you're part of the program, the secret program.
What is CTB or CTP?
Community Technology.
The Community Technology, yeah.
All right, and while we're on the topic of upgrades, when would you consider upgrading from standard to enterprise?
What features do you need that enterprise has that standard doesn't? There's the obvious one. If you need more than a certain amount of memory, depending on the version, if it's 2014 or later, you can have 128 gigs allocated to SQL Server. But other than that, it's the enterprise-only features like partitioning. TDE is enterprise-only, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
No column store, compression. Some of the neat internal features like the merry-go-round scans and stuff like that. But
yeah, and there are differences too in the BI stack for Enterprise Edition too. So much so that they made a BI edition in 2012 just because a lot of people wanted some of the stuff like data-driven subscriptions without having to spend like 7 times as much per core.
Yeah, the most common ones I've seen was encryption.
Or if if it's part of your new HADR strategy that you want availability groups, even 2016, the basic availability group that got announced is just one database. So not going to do you a lot of good. Not really much of a group. Only unavailable.
Let's see. Slava asked about HADR. So virtualization versus high availability groups as a high availability solution. What are the advantages and disadvantages to go one way or the other?
Oh dear, that's like a whole day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very large question.
Yeah. We
I guess very simply is that if you have your HA and DR through virtualization, you sort of take the problems out of SQL's hands. So like availability groups are a SQL feature. So if you are running them on SQL Server, you now have an extra layer of SQL Server stuff to troubleshoot. Whereas if you put your HADR into VMware, Hyper-V or whatever, and you use their tooling for HA and DR, then you kind to separate the responsibility of that stuff to, like, I don't know, like maybe like you have like VM admins who would handle that, and you would be free to just, deal with your SQL Server stuff. But it does that stuff, while it does add, the availability for SQL Server, it does also add complexity, to SQL Server. So all of a sudden you have all these new different kinds of weight stats and these different kind of issues, and like the syncing data across the availability group stuff that you have all of a sudden you have to deal with, and then patching it. And then if you've ever looked at service pack or cumulative update in the fixes that they roll out for availability groups, you may be terrified and you may not want that availability group.
I feel like Brent spends a lot of his time talking about availability groups, and
He does.
Most likely not a good fit for.
Because Microsoft presents them as these wonderful little golden eggs that you just set up once and all of a sudden everything's fine. But just even in like the last cumulative update that got released for 2014, they fixed a flaw where column store indexes were becoming corrupt if availability group failed over. So lots of stuff to think about.
Isn't it going to be available in Standard Edition coming up? Is that a rumor?
Yeah, which, God bless them. Yeah, well, I think I'm pretty sure they announced it. If they didn't, podcast guy cut this part out. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they announced it. It's just gonna be for one database though. So like you can have a one database availability group on Standard Edition. Just like, okay, thanks mirroring.
All right. So Jason, let's see. Jason Hurley. He says, when we set the maximum RAM that SQL Server uses, for example, 8 gigabytes, and we restart the server, then look at the task manager, it's actually using more than 8 gigabytes. Is that correct or normal?
Don't trust task manager.
Yeah, that's the first
line.
thing.
Yeah, rule number 1. You are probably better off getting performance counter or querying the DMVs to see how much memory is in use. But I would not trust task manager. It's a filthy liar.
Yeah. Perfmon is also a much better place to get memory usage and information from.
Yeah. Let's take one from Anders Larson. Hi, I love your sessions. We have a SQL 2014 instance with more than 200 or 2,000 small databases. Are there any configurations or trace flags to enable that to optimize that?
I would unconfigure that environment.
There's this really great trace flag where you install several different copies of SQL Server and you spread those bad boys out. No, but like seriously, if you have a lot of databases on a server, I've dealt with servers that had several thousand databases on them, and it sort of comes down to like, do you have enough RAM to accommodate all that you need to do with them? And are there some databases that are very active and need their own sort of area to go play in and leave all the, because like some of those smaller databases can be more piggish with the resources. So depending on how much resources you have allocated to the server and how hot some of the data is, you may need to think about moving some of them off to troubleshoot. But there's no like trace flag or configuration setting that would help you with that.
Let's move on to Mike Chubb. He says, we have everything from 2008 to 2014 with lots of migrating. Have you ever seen compatibility mode make a big difference? With one vendor app, I have, but so far with our homegrown stuff, it's been fine. I'm just wondering how concerned we should be. Mike Chubbs.
A lot of what I see happening in compatibility modes isn't necessarily performance related. It's just what options you have available to yourself. Obviously there have been some linguistic enhancements to T-SQL throughout the release, especially to like the window functions, the aggregating functions. So it's just giving yourself more options and more giving yourself some more SQL to work with is really the biggest upside of compatibility modes. I've never really seen a giant performance increase from switching compatibility modes.
Now, on a 2014 server, if you have,
yeah.
On a 2014 server, if you have compatibility mode set down, you're going to get the old CE, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that would be one big difference. The cardinality estimator changed in 2014. So if you're running on a 2014 server, but you're running in older compatibility mode, you might get different outcomes.
Yeah, and even the T-SQL improvements in 2012 were just a huge improvement in some of the specific things you're doing, like you said, windowing functions, and even some of the .NET CLRE type stuff like format and things like that just made things a little bit easier.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it affects it because I've never actually tested, but like there was one point in like older versions of SQL where running distinct and group by would come up with different query plans for like the same columns and everything, and there was one like group by was just much quicker than distinct for almost everything, but that sort of changed around 2012, I think. But I'm not sure if that leads back into compatibility stuff.
All right, question from John Onman. He says, does inserting data into a very large table, over 200 gigabytes, take longer versus inserting data into a small / empty table? As a side note, our archiving process seems to be running significantly slower. With partitioning or some other method, can you recommend that would be better?
So this was, I think this is 2014. I did a video on minimal logging. So if you look for Doug Broke It, that's one of the things that I broke, was inserting a lot of data. So there are methods in that video that will tell you how you can insert things much faster. And there's also a trick you can do, kind of like what you're saying, where inserting into a table with like no indexes, basically inserting into a heap and then adding the indexes later, can sometimes be easier than inserting into a table that already has its indexes.
Yeah, there are a lot of sort of unfortunate rules to minimal logging. Other major database platforms, you can create tables that aren't logged at all, where you can just make this table no logging. SQL will not give a single care in the world what you do to it. It will just never log anything, which is great for inserts. If your database is in full recovery and you can't get out of full recovery, or switch to bulk log and drop non-clustered indexes and hope that minimal logging works, if you can't do that stuff, then partitioning might work for you, because then you can just swap in partitions that you've inserted data to, and they become part of the data structure. And as archiving, you can swap data into colder storage or read-only storage that would perhaps help. But that's enterprise.
Question from Ali. He says, is it best practice, usually, or ideal to set up an FCI, a failover instance, and ADs together if you have the budget on a core mission-critical system?
If you're feeling fancy, if you don't like your weekends, you have lots of on-call staff. Hope that budget includes like 3 DBAs, because you're gonna have a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah, AGs require.
In principle, I don't have a problem with it.
A lot of hands-on management. If you have the budget, yes, I would incorporate extra DBAs for that budget.
DBAs and training and an identical staging environment that you can practice patching and failovers on. So like, don't think your budget is just going to buy you your prod environment that is just going to be cool now. There's a lot of work to do leading up to that, and as you have that fancy prod environment for its life cycle, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to have to do to care and maintain it. So. Make sure that budget takes that into account.
While we're on the topic of that, we got to move on to Kimberly. It says she's recently exposed to always-on availability groups, so pardon my ignorance. Why would one host an availability replica on an FCI? Isn't that redundant?
No. Availability groups work on separate storage. Failover cluster works on shared storage. So you could have, a failover cluster right? With with an availability group, so the availability group can serve over from fail over from one server to the other, and then you could have a replica somewhere sitting somewhere else on other storage that you could fail over entirely to, or just have a read-only version of that people could get their reporting queries and whatever other nonsense they have to do on that read-only replica. The upside of that is that storage is no longer a single point of failure, and hopefully no one server is a single point of failure. You could still have a cluster fail, but then you could fail over to the other availability group server and make that the primary, or you could have a single server in the failover cluster fail and switch over to the other server in that failover cluster.
All right, let's take one more from Ben. He says, we're finally going from SQL 2000 and SQL 2005, 2012. What are the most common pain points?
Going to 2012. Why? It's 2014. 2016 is about to come out. Why are you setting yourself back two versions?
Is it like cheaper to go to 2012 and then?
No, it's silly. Why are you going to 2012?
Maybe it's the vendor. Maybe it's like a vendor app that we don't support that yet.
I
What was the question here?
What are the most common pain points? Nostalgia.
Ooh, you don't get to use that crappy old SSMS anymore where everything's in black.
Yeah.
That one's lousy too.
SQL W.
That's it.
I think there's a lot of goodness that you'll be jumping into. How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but
time to fly ahead.
But aren't there some cons of doing like an in-place upgrade? Don't we have a blog about that?
Oh yeah, in-place upgrades are the pits.
Especially from 2000. Oh, I can't even imagine what could go wrong with that.
Yeah, if you're not putting that stuff on new hardware, you're not doing yourself any favors.
Yeah.
Just stay where you are. It's not going to do anything.
Yep.
Gotcha. All right, guys. It's 11:45 Chicago time.
12:45.
We are going to be we're going to be sipping wine in Napa Valley this time next week, so I don't think we'll be doing office hours, or maybe we will. I'm not sure.
Oh, we are. Brent said we are. It's on the itinerary doing office hours.
Oh,
where is the itinerary? Am I missing something?
I don't know. It's in an Excel file.
that Eric trolls late at night.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jessica, 7 a.m. rubbing floors.
Well, okay. Well, maybe we'll be in one big room together doing office hours. So I guess we will be started.
I'm sitting on Richie's lap.
I'm game. Let's go.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
See you next time.